Why does no one ever talk about the Blob? Seriously, I feel like I'm the only person on the planet who's ever played these games. I sing their praises constantly and recommend them to people all the time, and 9 times out of 10, no one has a clue what I'm going on about. But this game deserves so much more than that. It's very apparent that a lot of love, care, and creativity went into creating the Blob games, and I think it's such a shame that these games slipped under the radar for so many people. They're super cool and fun, and I don't want to be the only person out there that gushes about it anymore. So assuming you, the viewer, are part of that 90% that have never played or even heard of these games, allow me to give you a proper introduction. The Blob is the greatest game ever made. The Blob is a video game developed by Blue Tongue Entertainment, published by THQ, and released for the Wii back in 2008. There was also a sequel, but we'll get to that. You play as the titular Blob and must work to restore color and life back to Chroma City after Comrade Black and his Inked Corporation sap it all away and enslave the citizens. You do this by absorbing and mixing different colors to repaint the city's buildings, freeing the citizens inside, and fighting the color Nazis, Inkies, that are keeping them captive. Most everything Blob touches is instantly restored with his current color, and there are several challenges that require you to restore certain buildings using a certain color, or use a certain amount of color energy to bring life back to a monument or a landmark. And by the end of each level, the once lifeless, silent landscape is now bursting with color, music, and happy citizens. I don't know about you, but I can't really think of any other game like this other than the ones that shamelessly rip it off. Yeah, before I go any further, I should probably mention real quick that I teased a Blob video like 4 years ago in one of my older videos about Paper Mario. Back then I had every intention of exposing Paper Mario Color Splash for being eerily similar to the Blob. So real quick, let's just run through the similarities to satisfy the people that have surely been in agony for years waiting for what I had to say. A once colorful landscape is being drained of color by a villain clad in black ink. You go around restoring color to the colorless areas of the world. The citizens are also drained of their color and you need to save them. Huh. Is that really it? I could have sworn there was more. Ah well, hope that was worth the wait. Anyway, in terms of gameplay, there isn't really anything out there like the Blob. Going around the level painting buildings, saving citizens, and smashing Inkies is incredibly satisfying thanks to this game's targeting system and wonderful sound design, and watching life slowly return to these dull landscapes as the music builds up adds a great sense of progression and accomplishment to each level. And trust me, we will come back to the music soon enough. I like to think of it like this. You know how some games have hub worlds that start out gloomy or relatively dull, but as you play the game you slowly restore liveliness to it and the music becomes happier or more triumphant? The Blob has that same sense of progression for every level. This sense of accomplishment is capped off with the transform engines, which explode to restore energy to the leftover bits of the level, completing their transition from blank and boring to bursting with life. Basically, every aspect of the Blob's gameplay is crafted so that every little thing the player does noticeably brings them closer to a bright, colorful end goal, and adds to a great overall sense of gratification. In between these levels, we're also treated to some adorable and pretty funny cutscenes. The characters speak in gibberish and mumbles, and the way they interact reminds me a lot of the old LEGO games. It's all really charming stuff, and even though I still think the Blob 1's cutscenes look pretty good, the Blob 2's are undoubtedly far more beautiful, and they really make me appreciate the art direction and animation of both games. Speaking of the Blob 2, it improves on pretty much everything the original established, which is what every good sequel should strive to do. I've already mentioned the better cutscenes, but the game also adds new power-ups to use, new baddies to fight, some cool side-scrolling sections, a super cute robot friend for Blob named Pinky, and a soundtrack that's possibly even better than the first games. Alright, it's finally time to talk about the music. These games have two of the best soundtracks in video games, period. I know, that's a bold claim, but I'm 100% serious. The music isn't just the cherry on top of these games, it's the best part as far as I'm concerned. John Guscott is the composer for both of these games, and I think it's such a shame that he hasn't worked on more games after the Blob. Most of the soundtrack is comprised of upbeat jazz, and pretty much every single track is extremely catchy and memorable. Seriously, I listen to this stuff on my own time outside of the games, and I stay put on the title screen every time without fail just to hear that. It's all just so good. Take a listen for yourself. It's honestly a crime that these soundtracks aren't available on music streaming services. On top of that, each color in the game is accompanied by its own instruments and musical sounds that play every time you paint something. And as I mentioned before, the music builds and becomes more upbeat the more you paint, making listening to the game's excellent soundtrack almost like an incentive for making progress. It's great. I love it. I don't want to say it. Do I have to say it? Okay, fine. In the interest of being fair, these games do have some problems that I should mention. For one, the levels in these games are pretty damn long. Like, I'm talking a half hour to almost an hour long each. Of course, sticking around in a level for a while as you restore it is part of the game's sense of progression, but I will admit that I was sick of a fair few of them by the end. The game also has a timer, which, given the length of the levels, seems pretty unnecessary, and would make more sense if it was counting up to show how much time you spent in a level instead of counting down to a lost life or a game over. Also, the characters in this game do not shut up. Most of the time, their dialogue boxes don't actually stop gameplay, which is good, but sometimes it feels like you can't do anything without one of the characters chiming in to tell you what you're supposed to do next, even if it's painfully obvious. One last thing, I wouldn't really classify this game as a platformer. Honestly, I'm not really sure what you would classify this game as. But Blob is a bit heavy and sticks to his surroundings pretty easily, so when you do have to jump across a gap or something, there are times when it's a bit harder than it should be to get Blob to do what you want him to do. This was even worse in the original Wii version of the Blob when you had to use motion controls to jump, but they've fixed that in subsequent re-releases. Okay, other than that, the games are perfect. So yeah, De Blob is a pretty great game, and De Blob 2 is even better. Both games have fantastic soundtracks, unique gameplay, and are just so fun and full of charm that playing them puts me in the best mood. Even the DS version was pretty good. Okay, maybe not great, but I still enjoyed it. So again, I have to ask, why didn't this game get the recognition it deserved? De Blob was one of only 2 original properties ever created by Bluetongue, and De Blob 2 was the last game they released before becoming effectively defunct under THQ. THQ itself also went bankrupt a couple years after De Blob 2's release, and while this was due to many other factors, the closure of Bluetongue and THQ's following financial struggles do heavily imply, at least to me, that the studio wasn't bringing in enough profit for THQ to justify keeping them around as they were. It makes me so sad because it's easy to see that a lot of effort went into both of these games, and that effort largely ended up going unnoticed. I mean, come on, they even made these beautiful cinematic trailers and recolored Blob on the box art of De Blob 2 based on the console it was on. They didn't have to do that, but they did, because they cared, and it's adorable, and they deserve better, damn it! Sorry, I just get really passionate about De Blob. Luckily though, it's not all doom and gloom for De Blob's fate. Nowadays, thanks to THQ Nordic acquiring the property, we've received ports of both De Blob games to Steam and modern consoles, which is honestly more than I could have ever hoped for. I'm not sure how much I'm gonna do in the way of turning heads towards De Blob, but I at least hope that these games being available on current platforms will allow a greater number of people to appreciate them, and will hopefully create interest in the property again. Realistically, I can't really say that I'm expecting anything new to come out of De Blob anytime soon, but THQ Nordic, if you're listening, De Blob 3 and Blob for Smash, come on guys, it would be so cool!